Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making pumpkin oatmeal cookies. Anytime you want to incorporate pumpkin into a baked good, you run into a pretty specific problem, and that is that pumpkin is very watery. So when I was developing this recipe, it was really important that I counteract that. And the first thing that came to my mind to do was to cook out the water that is in our butter, because believe it or not, butter actually has a fair percentage of water in it as well. So what we're going to do to start off is we are going to brown our butter. You're going to need 1 cup of butter for this recipe, and we are going to start right on the stovetop, drop it into a medium-sized skillet, and ideally this should have a light bottom. It's not that you couldn't do this in like a black cast iron, but we are going to be relying on some visual cues here, and a light bottomed pan makes it really easy to tell when our butter is properly browned. Don't put any paper in there. All right, for some reason this doesn't want to leave wrapper. Browning butter is one of my favorite things to do because it makes the house smell amazing. We are just going to melt this butter over like a medium-low heat. You don't want to melt it too quickly, then you run the risk of burning your butter. And burned butter is terrible, browned butter is wonderful. So just have a little patience. We're going to melt this. So browning the butter serves a practical function of, removing the water, but from an Epicurean standpoint, it also serves a great purpose because brown butter has so much more flavor than regular unbrowned butter. We are sort of caramelizing the milk solids here, and it really has kind of like a nice fall feel to it too. Also, it only takes a couple minutes to do. Okay, so once that butter is melted, we are going to continue cooking this on medium heat, and you want to swirl the pan pretty regularly while you're doing this. You're going to hear some sizzling, there's going to be some popping happening. Just keep moving that butter around. So what's happening here is all that water is evaporating, and that's a good thing. Now, once this sizzling and popping starts to slow down, what's happening next is those browned bits are beginning to form, which is the milk solids getting nicely caramelized and is what's going to give us all of our flavor. So keep a close eye, because once those brown bits start to form, you want to be pretty quick about removing this from heat. Otherwise, you're going to burn everything. And that would be a tragedy, because we do not waste butter around here. And it's pretty easy to know if you accidentally burned the butter because it smells burned instead of smelling like delicious, nutty, caramelly heaven. Let me get my microphone nice and close so you can hear that sizzle. Okay, we're close. Until most of the water's gone because it's not sizzling anymore. I see some really, really light browning. I want it to get a little bit deeper than that. Just keep everything moving. All right, I've got some nice golden brown butter there. I want to immediately remove this from the heat. Don't go too far, you'll burn it. And we are going to pour this right into a heat-proof bowl. I'm going to pour it right into the large mixing bowl that I'm going to be using to bake my cookies. All right, beautiful. All right, here's the downside to using brown butter. Right now it's super, super hot. So if we were to add our sugars at this point, it's gonna melt the sugars. We're gonna have cookies that just are a greasy mess all over our oven. So we need to let this butter cool until it is no longer warm to the touch. How long that takes can depend on the specifics of your kitchen. Fortunately, I have some butter that I browned before we started filming that is ready to go. Now, while your butter is cooling, you should get your oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, because on the bright side, there's no chilling needed for this recipe, though you could chill it if you wanted to. So this butter is browned, it's cooled, it's no longer feeling warm to the touch. So let's start baking. So for the sugars, we are going to start with dark brown sugar. You're going to need 1 cup or 200 grams of firmly packed light brown sugar, or you can use a blend of light and dark brown sugar. I'm just using light brown sugar today. Let's get that in there. And we're still going to use some granulated sugar because all brown sugar can make the cookie a little bit too soft. These are nice, soft and chewy cookies, but you don't want them to be too soft. So for the granulated sugar, we're doing a 1/2 cup or 100 grams. Next, we need 2 eggs, but we are only going to be using the egg yolks. So again, with a pumpkin, lots of water in it. In order to combat that moisture, we want to get rid of the part of the egg that has a high water content, which is the egg white. We're just going to be using the yolks. So a lot of these tips and tricks that I used for developing this pumpkin cookie recipe, I used in my sourdough cookie recipe because they kind of have the same problem when you're trying to incorporate sourdough starter. There's 1. And there is 2. All right, next ingredient is our pumpkin. So we're going to be using pumpkin puree, 100% pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie filling. This is the canned stuff. They're usually sold right next to each other, so make sure you're using the 100% pumpkin and not the pie filling. And again, we have the issue of pumpkin having a lot of water. We're not going to be able to remove all of it, but we are going to do ourselves some favors by removing some of it by blotting the pumpkin. So to do this, you just want some paper towels, and we are just going to blot out as much moisture as we can. This is 2/3 cup of pumpkin puree, or 160 grams, and that is measured before we blot it. After blotting, I usually have about 130 grams. So through my first paper towel, and I just repeat this until the towel isn't removing much moisture. So when the pumpkin starts to stick to the towel, that's a pretty good sign I've gotten out as much as I'm going to. All right, we're not getting quite as much moisture. We're getting little bits of pumpkin starting to stick, and it feels dry, or it looks dry, I should say. So, see a little bit of pumpkin sticking. Let's add this to our mixing bowl. And you can see by how it's sticking to the spatula just how much drier the pumpkin is than it was. Next, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. This is my homemade vanilla extract. If you haven't checked out that video on how to make your own vanilla extract, I would recommend it. Makes a really nice gift. And we're going to stir everything together really well here. And it probably is going to smell amazing right about now. We haven't even added any spices yet. I'm not sure if I mentioned this when we were adding the eggs, but those should be room temperature. All of your ingredients should ideally be the same temperature when you combine them. That way the dough comes together nicely. If you add cold egg yolks to butter that is not even warm, but not solidified, it can sort of cause the butter to seize up a little bit. Not ideal. Slide that one out of the way. And you're going to need a separate medium-sized mixing bowl. Make sure you tare it. And we are going to add our flour. So we're using all-purpose flour for today's recipe. And you will need 2 1/3 cups, which is 290 grams of flour. Almost there. We'll also be adding a teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and a teaspoon of salt. We're just using table salt today. Need my teaspoon back. All right, and then for flavor, we're going to be adding some pumpkin spice or pumpkin pie spice. You can buy this pre-made. I make my own. I believe I even shared a video on how to make it. It's very easy, but you can check that out if you want. You will need 2 teaspoons of this pumpkin pie spice. It smells so good. These are oatmeal cookies, but we are not adding our oats just yet. We're going to go ahead and whisk our dry ingredients together, get everything nicely combined. All right, bring back your pumpkin mixture, and let's add the dry ingredients to the wet. I'm just gonna do this in 2 parts. There's not a ton of dry ingredients just yet. We'll stir this in. Now things should really be smelling nice. We want all of our dry ingredients to be nicely incorporated before we move on to the oats. I'm not even a pumpkin fan personally, but I actually love these cookies. Maybe that's a bad thing. If you are a pumpkin fan, I want to know if you like these cookies. For our oats, we are going to be adding 2 cups of oats. I like using the whole rolled oats, old-fashioned oats. We're going to add 2 cups, which is 160 grams. Look, I got this out to help me measure it, and I didn't even use it. Could have gone without dirtying the dish, but I had it, so. All right, let's go ahead and stir this together. Get those oats nicely folded in, and then our cookie dough is done. But we are done because we're still going to bake them, and I have a nice optional but delicious glaze that I'm going to show you how to make as well. Make sure you're scraping the sides and bottom of the bowl. Sometimes the oats like to hide down there, and you want a nice uniform dough. It really smells so good. We need a candle in this scent. Okay, I like to make these cookies a little bit bigger than your average cookie. So I take my standard 1.5 tablespoon cookie scoop, and I use 2 of them to make 3 tablespoon scoops of dough, which I'll try to remember to link to this. Remind me if I forget, because I often forget. Or if you're weighing your cookie dough, it's 66 grams per cookie. Your oven should be preheated at this point. Remember, we're preheating it to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. If you forgot, you can just cover the dough. You can even chill the dough for a little bit while it preheats. We'll space these cookies on the baking sheet. Make sure you give them at least 2 inches apart because they're going to spread in the oven, as they should. And rolling them into nice smooth balls, or smooth-ish balls, just gives them a nicer appearance when they're done baking. Of course, you can make these smaller if you want, just bake them for less time. If you're doing 1.5 tablespoon scoops, I'd probably check at like 9 to 10 minutes, I wanna say. All right, into the oven. They go in the center rack of your 350 degree Fahrenheit oven, and these are going to bake for about 12 minutes. All right, we're going to let these cool for about 5 to 10 minutes on the baking sheet, and then we can remove them to a cooling rack where they can cool completely. So I know I mentioned earlier that I have a really nice glaze for these. You don't want to add the glaze until the cookies are cooled completely, but while they're cooling, let's go ahead and mix that up. All right, for the glaze, you are going to need 1 1/4 cups of powdered sugar. To add a little depth of flavor here, I like to add just a little bit of brown sugar, so like a tablespoon of firmly packed light brown sugar. Don't want to add too much or it can make the glaze a little bit gritty. Optional, you could add a pinch of cinnamon or pumpkin spice here as well, but we're just going to do these 2 sugars today. Just gonna break that up just a little bit. And then we are going to be using milk. So you'll need usually about 1 to 2 tablespoons of milk to get this glaze to the proper consistency. I'm going to start with 1 1/2 tablespoons. Keep that handy in case we need more. Something else I like to add to this glaze is just a tablespoon of light corn syrup. You could skip this if you want. It's not the same thing as high fructose corn syrup, but I know not everybody has it handy. I like to add it because it helps the glaze to set more firmly and it gives it a really nice consistency. But again, you can skip this. So we're just going to do a tablespoon of this and then just a little bit of vanilla extract, just a 1/4 teaspoon. You don't want to do too much because it can make the glaze too sweet tasting. It's already sweet with the powdered sugar. Don't want to do too much vanilla. So we'll whisk everything together and I will show you the consistency we're looking for. But if it is too thick, you're just going to add a little bit more milk, a splash at a time. Of course, if you accidentally make it too thin, you can add more powdered sugar, but I always err on adding a little less of the liquid to start with. That way you don't end up adding too much. It's better to have to add more milk than to have to add more sugar. You can see my powdered sugar has some lumps, but those should break up just fine. And this is much too thick. I want this to ribbon off of the whisk and it's not ribboning for me. So I'll just do another teeny tiny splash of milk. This thing's pretty full, so I'm going to use my 1/4 teaspoon to add my splashes. And the consistency I'm looking for is similar to what I do for my sugar cookies. And that is when you lift the whisk up, that ribbon that forms, it should hold its shape for a couple of seconds before it dissolves back into the rest of the icing. We don't want it to dissolve too quickly or too slowly. This looks pretty good. Let's check if our cookies are cooled enough. And magically they are. And we are just going to drizzle this over the cookies. Probably can't see that on camera. I should have picked a different cookie to start with. Start in the middle. There you go. It doesn't really matter how messy you are with this. I've found once the icing settles, it looks pretty nice no matter how you do it. And that is how you make these pumpkin oatmeal cookies. I cannot wait to hear what you think. My professional advice is to let the glaze set before you enjoy. That will make the eating process much neater. We're not gonna do that. That is a good cookie.
I'm feeling your hair.
Thank you. What are you doing?
This one was recording. And then my mommy recording.
What? I'm not even a big pumpkin pan. Not pumpkin pan. Peter Pan, but pumpkin.